In the fragmented tapestry of early 2nd millennium BC Mesopotamia, where the dust of forgotten empires settled upon the enduring foundations of squabbling city-states, a modest settlement nestled on the winding Euphrates River began to stir. This was Babylon, an unpretentious outpost, then little more than a fortified village among dozens, its fate uncertain, its future unwritten, its strategic potential yet unrealized. Born from the ambitious migrations of the Amorites, a dynamic, semi-nomadic people from the western deserts who had, for centuries, slowly integrated into the ancient Sumerian and Akkadian landscapes, Babylon was a relatively new player, lacking the venerable lineage of Uruk, the sacral authority of Nippur, or the commercial might of Ur. Its initial presence was humble, a minor administrative or tribal centre clinging to the riverbanks, one among a multitude of Amorite principalities that dotted the region following the collapse of the Third Dynasty of Ur. Yet, a different current flowed through Babylon's nascent streets, a nascent ambition personified by a succession of visionary leaders. Among them, Sumu-la-El, who ascended the fragile throne in 1880 BC, proved pivotal. He was no mere tribal chieftain content with local skirmishes. He was a builder, a diplomat, and a strategist with an eagle's eye for opportunity in a land perpetually in flux. Mesopotamia was then dominated by larger, more ancient city-states like Isin and Larsa, who fiercely vied for the true inheritance of Sumerian glory, and the powerful northern kingdom of Eshnunna. Babylon at this juncture was largely overlooked, a convenient buffer or an occasional target for raids, never a true contender. Sumu-la-El's early reign was defined by relentless consolidation, not just of territory, but of a distinct Babylonian identity, striving to separate his nascent kingdom from the long shadows of its more established neighbours. With meticulous care, he began to lay the administrative and military groundwork for future expansion. He understood that true power stemmed from control over resources and strategic choke points. His first priority was to strengthen Babylon's defences, transforming simple mud-brick fortifications into formidable ramparts designed to deter opportunistic raiders and challenge the might of rival kings. These weren't grand, sprawling walls, but stout, practical barriers that projected an image of rising strength and resilience. Diplomacy became as potent a weapon as any spear in Sumu-la-El's arsenal. He forged alliances and broke them with equal precision, skillfully navigating the treacherous political currents of the Isin-Larsa period. His engineers diverted canals, bringing life-giving waters from the Euphrates to arid lands, boosting agricultural output and securing a vital economic base for his burgeoning state. This control over water resources not only fed his populace but also granted him leverage over downstream rivals, a subtle but effective form of economic warfare. The king's military campaigns were measured, each victory a carefully planned stepping stone rather than a reckless leap into the unknown. He first secured control over nearby towns like Kish, Sippar, Dilbat, and Marad, pivotal locations along the Euphrates and its associated canals. These acquisitions were not spectacular conquests that garnered immediate fame, but rather a slow, inexorable tightening of Babylon's grip on the central Mesopotamian plain. By consolidating these strategic points, Sumu-la-El gradually established a defensive perimeter, extending Babylon's influence over critical trade routes and ensuring a reliable flow of agricultural surplus. The established powers, entrenched in their ancient prerogatives and consumed by their own internecine struggles, initially underestimated Babylon's persistent growth. They viewed it as another transient Amorite principality, destined to rise and fall like so many before it. Yet, Sumu-la-El possessed a vision that extended far beyond immediate skirmishes. He sought to establish a lasting dominion, one built on stable administrative frameworks, a burgeoning economy, and a growing sense of loyalty among his diverse subjects. He invested in public works, fostering a sense of prosperity and stability that contrasted with the often turbulent reigns of his rivals. By the end of his lengthy 36-year reign, Babylon was no longer a minor satellite or an obscure provincial town. It had transformed into a burgeoning regional power, possessing a substantial territory, a formidable, if still untested, army, and a burgeoning reputation that forced even the kings of Isin and Larsa to acknowledge its rising star with a mixture of apprehension and reluctant respect. The humble origins of the Amorite settlement were becoming a distant memory, replaced by the murmurs of its growing influence, a slow but certain eclipsing of its more ancient neighbours. preparing the stage for an unprecedented era of imperial might under a future king who would fully unleash its potential. The foundations of an empire were, against all odds, firmly laid. When the young Hammurabi ascended the throne of Babylon in 1792 BC, the city, though no longer an obscure village thanks to the patient groundwork of his predecessors, remained merely one among a constellation of ambitious stars in a perpetually contested firmament. Mesopotamia was a vast, glittering mosaic of competing city-states, each ruled by its own Amorite dynasty, its own pantheon of localized gods, and its own fiercely guarded ambition. To the south, the venerable and long-reigning Rim-Sin, the first of Larsa, cast a colossal shadow, having already swallowed the ancient kingdoms of Isin and Ur, controlling the most sacred and fertile lands. To the east, Eshnunna, a formidable power, dominated the lucrative trade routes leading to the resource-rich Zagros Mountains and Elam. Upriver, the vibrant kingdom of Mari, under the charismatic Zimri-Lim, boasted a sprawling palace and a sophisticated administrative network, holding sway over the middle Euphrates. Further north, the legacy of the recently deceased Shamshi-Adad I had dissolved, leaving behind a power vacuum that fragmented Assyria into smaller, more manageable pieces, yet still presented a potential threat. Hammurabi, initially, was but a minor king, a seemingly secondary player in this grand, perilous game of thrones, surrounded by these colossal figures. Yet, within the modest confines of Babylon, Hammurabi nurtured a vision that transcended the limited horizons of his contemporaries. He was a sovereign of profound patience and calculated ferocity, a master of strategy who understood that empire was not seized in a single glorious charge, but meticulously forged, alloyed with diplomacy, administrative genius, and the cold steel of a disciplined army. His early years were not marked by dramatic conquests, but by quiet consolidation, astute internal development, and the patient observation of his rivals as they bled each other dry in exhausting, indecisive wars. While Larsa and Eshnunna grappled, Hammurabi strengthened Babylon's fortifications, not with ostentatious display, but with pragmatic, formidable engineering. He ordered the excavation of new canals and the dredging of old ones, ensuring a vital agricultural surplus that could sustain his growing population and military, simultaneously granting him a subtle leverage over downstream neighbours dependent on the same lifelines. These infrastructural projects, often dismissed as mundane, were the sinews of his future empire, guaranteeing economic stability and allowing his subjects to thrive, fostering a loyalty that transcended mere feudal obligation. The dramatic progression of Hammurabi's ascent unfurled in a series of brilliantly orchestrated military campaigns, each a chapter in a meticulously planned conquest. He did not rush, but waited, like a hunter studying his prey for the opportune moment. His first major thrust came against his southern rival Larsa. For decades, Rim-Sin I had been an almost unassailable force, his kingdom a bulwark of Sumerian tradition. Recognizing the futility of a direct isolated assault, Hammurabi wove a complex web of alliances. He joined forces with Mari and Eshnunna, leveraging their combined might against the rising power of Elam, an eastern threat that concerned them all. This seemingly common cause allowed him to gather intelligence, assess the strengths of his allies, and subtly shift the balance of power. Then, with the external threat temporarily neutralized, the alliances began to fray, exposing the strategic fragility of his partners. In approximately 1764 BC, the inevitable clash with Rim-Sin began. It was a brutal, protracted struggle that encapsulated Hammurabi's methodical brilliance. His armies, now seasoned and well supplied, moved with grim determination. He systematically conquered Larsa's vassal cities, tightening the noose around the venerable capital. The siege of Larsa itself was legendary, lasting for months, a testament to Rim-Sin's resilience and Hammurabi's relentless pressure. In a stroke of engineering genius and strategic ruthlessness, Hammurabi reportedly diverted the Euphrates River, starving Larsa of its water and breaking its spirit. The fall of Larsa in 1763 BC was the thunderclap that announced Babylon's true arrival. Rim-Sin, after 60 years of unbroken rule, was overthrown, and the vast southern plain, including the sacred cities of Ur and Isin, fell under Babylonian dominion. This single victory fundamentally altered the Mesopotamian landscape, transforming Babylon from a strong regional power into the unquestioned master of the south. But Hammurabi's ambition did not end with the Euphrates Valley. With the south secured, his gaze turned north and east. The once ally Eshnunna, controlling crucial trade routes and possessing a formidable military, now posed the greatest threat to his burgeoning empire. Hammurabi launched a swift, decisive campaign, crushing Eshnunna's forces and dismantling its defences. His conquest was often thorough, sometimes involving the complete destruction of cities to prevent future rebellions, a cold pragmatism that underlined his imperial ambition. Next, his attention swung to his former ally, Mari, whose vast archives later revealed the intricate diplomatic chess game Hammurabi had played. Zimri-Lim, the king of Mari, a sophisticated ruler who had exchanged lavish gifts and diplomatic courtesies with Hammurabi, suddenly found his kingdom isolated and vulnerable. In 1761 BC, Hammurabi turned on Mari with devastating effect. The siege was swift, its destruction absolute. The magnificent palace of Mari, a wonder of the ancient world, was razed to the ground, its walls systematically torn down, ensuring that this powerful centre of culture and politics could never again challenge Babylon. This act, though seemingly brutal, was a calculated political manoeuvre, a clear message to any who contemplated resistance and a crucial step in securing his northern flank. The remaining fragmented pieces of the former Assyrian Empire, known then as Subatu, offered little resistance and were subsequently absorbed into Babylon's expanding domain. By 1755 BC, Hammurabi stood supreme. He had transformed the patchwork of city-states into a vast, unified empire stretching from the Persian Gulf to the borders of Assyria. This was not merely a military conquest, but a profound act of state-building. He understood that true stability lay not just in military might, but in effective governance. He implemented a highly centralized administrative system, appointing loyal governors, shakanaku, and officials to oversee every province, ensuring the efficient collection of taxes, the maintenance of law and order, and the flow of resources to the capital. He established a sophisticated postal system, allowing rapid communication across his vast dominion, binding it together with invisible threads of imperial command. Crucially, Hammurabi undertook a profound religious reformation. Babylon's patron deity, Marduk, was elevated to the pinnacle of the Mesopotamian pantheon, his cult promoted throughout the empire. Local gods were often reinterpreted as manifestations of Marduk or his divine retinue, creating a unified religious ideology that bolstered Babylonian hegemony and provided a cohesive spiritual framework for his diverse subjects. This elevation of Marduk was not merely religious, it was a powerful ideological tool, justifying his conquests as divinely ordained and linking the well-being of the empire directly to the worship of its patron god. The true zenith of Hammurabi's reign, the culminating expression of his genius, was the promulgation of his groundbreaking legal system, carved meticulously onto towering diorite stelae, the most famous of which was discovered centuries later in Susa. These laws were not merely statutes, but a monumental testament to his vision of a just and ordered society. Displayed publicly in every major city of his empire, the Code of Hammurabi was designed to unify the disparate customs and traditions of his conquered lands under a single, overarching legal framework. It comprised 282 laws addressing every facet of daily life: property rights, family law, trade regulations, agricultural practices, and criminal justice. While not the first written law code in history, earlier Sumerian codes existed. It was by far the most comprehensive, detailed, and widely enforced to date. The code famously enshrined the principle of lex talionis, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, but it was far from a simplistic system of retribution. It carefully differentiated penalties based on the social status of both the offender and the victim, reflecting the stratified nature of Babylonian society: freemen, commoners, and slaves. It protected the weak from the strong, regulated prices, ensured fair weights and measures, and established clear responsibilities for all citizens, from the highest official to the humblest farmer. The prologue, an epilogue of the Stela, presented Hammurabi not as a ruthless conqueror, but as a divinely appointed shepherd of his people, the king of justice, chosen by the gods to bring order out of chaos, to establish righteousness in the land. This carefully crafted image served to legitimize his rule, presenting his conquests as a benevolent act of divine will, ensuring peace and prosperity through the impartial application of law. The resonance of Hammurabi's code reverberated across Mesopotamia for centuries, influencing subsequent legal traditions and solidifying his reputation as one of history's most effective rulers. He had not merely conquered a territory, he had created a true empire, a stable political entity bound by law, unified by administration, and justified by a sophisticated ideological framework. By the time of his death in 1750 BC, Babylon was no longer just a city, but the heart of a vast, formidable power, an imperial jewel shining brightly in the ancient world, a testament to the iron will and brilliant mind of the king who forged it. The colossal shadow of Hammurabi's reign, which had unified Mesopotamia under Babylonian dominion, proved too immense for his successors to entirely fill. Upon his death in 1750 BC, the vast empire, seemingly forged in immutable bronze, began to display the hairline fractures inherent in any dominion built by a single extraordinary will. The complex administrative machinery, the carefully balanced alliances, and the centralized authority that Hammurabi had meticulously constructed were now entrusted to hands less capable, less visionary, and ultimately less ruthless than his own. The stability he had so painstakingly achieved, the great peace he had enforced, slowly but inexorably began to unravel, revealing the underlying tensions and perennial ambitions of a land that had known unity only briefly. His son, Sumu-la-El, reigned 1749 to 1712 BC, inherited an empire at its zenith, but one teetering on the precipice of profound external and internal pressures. Almost immediately, the periphery of the empire, which Hammurabi had held with an iron grip, began to chafe. Ambitious local rulers, eager to reclaim their former independence, ignited a series of devastating rebellions. The southern regions, particularly Sumer and Akkad, which held deep-seated historical and cultural identities distinct from Babylon, proved fertile ground for insurgency. Cities like Ur, Larsa, and Isin, whose ancient glory Hammurabi had extinguished, now rose in defiant challenge, their citizens rallying behind charismatic leaders who promised a return to older ways. The most significant of these was the emergence of the Sealand dynasty, a formidable entity in the marshy southern delta region, which quickly severed Babylon's vital access to the Persian Gulf and its lucrative maritime trade routes. This loss was a crippling blow, choking the flow of essential resources and revenue into the capital. Sumu-la-El fought relentlessly, leading campaigns that often saw him temporarily reclaim lost territories, only for them to slip away again as soon as his army's back was turned. He rebuilt walls, re-established garrisons, and tried to rekindle the Hammurabic spirit. But the sheer scale of the challenges, coupled with a palpable decline in central authority, meant that each victory was fleeting, each reconquest temporary. The economic prosperity that had defined Hammurabi's rule began to wane, replaced by the strain of constant warfare and severed trade. The pattern continued with Sumu-la-El's successors, Abi-Eshu, 1711 to 1684 BC, Ammi-Ditana, 1683 to 1647 BC, Ammi-Saduqa, 1646 to 1626 BC, and Samsu-Ditana, 1625 to 1595 BC. Each generation saw a further contraction of the empire, a gradual erosion of its boundaries, and an increasing focus on merely defending the Babylonian heartland. The grand vision of a unified Mesopotamia receded, replaced by the grim reality of a shrinking kingdom constantly under siege. The administrative genius of Hammurabi became a distant memory, as provincial governors became increasingly independent, and the once feared Babylonian army found itself spread too thin, constantly battling internal dissent and opportunistic raids. The magnificent network of canals that Hammurabi had so proudly developed became difficult to maintain, leading to agricultural decline in some areas and further economic instability. The once formidable reputation of Babylon slowly diminished, replaced by a growing perception of weakness that beckoned new, bolder predators. It was into this simmering cauldron of internal decay that a catastrophic and entirely unforeseen external force descended, like a thunderbolt from a clear sky. The Hittites. Hailing from distant Anatolia, a land of rugged mountains and formidable iron, they were an enigmatic power whose presence in Mesopotamia had been, until then, largely confined to rumour and distant diplomatic exchanges. Their empire was nascent, their ambitions still largely unknown to the rulers of Babylon. Yet, under the audacious King Meshili I, a massive Hittite army undertook an unprecedented, audacious raid. Sometime around 1595 BC, they swept across northern Mesopotamia, a whirlwind of chariots and disciplined infantry, bypassing the weakened remnants of Babylonian defences and striking directly at the heart of the empire. The arrival of the Hittites was a profound shock, a brutal testament to Babylon's vulnerability. Samsu-Ditana, the last king of Hammurabi's dynasty, was utterly unprepared for such a distant and overwhelming threat. The Hittite advance was swift and devastating. They did not aim for prolonged conquest but for plunder and prestige, a demonstration of their burgeoning power. Babylon, the venerable city of Hammurabi, was sacked with a ferocity that left its grand structures smouldering. Temples were desecrated, palaces plundered, and the city's population subjected to the horrors of a conquering army. The most symbolically crushing blow, however, was the seizure of the cult statue of Marduk, the revered patron deity of Babylon. To the Mesopotamian mind, the removal of a city's patron deity implied not merely military defeat but a profound theological collapse, a sign that the gods themselves had abandoned their city. This act of sacrilege was a spiritual wound that would fester for centuries. But Mushili's raid, though devastating, was transient. The Hittites, far from their Anatolian homeland, had no intention of occupying Babylon indefinitely. Loaded with plunder and having made their fearsome statement, they retreated as swiftly as they had come, leaving behind a ruined city, a broken dynasty, and a power vacuum in the heart of Mesopotamia. The raid, lasting perhaps only a few weeks or months, left an indelible scar, shattering the last vestiges of the old Babylonian Empire's cohesion and utterly exposing its profound weakness. Into this desolation, a different, more insidious threat had been slowly but relentlessly infiltrating Mesopotamia for decades: the Kassites. Unlike the lightning strike of the Hittites, the Kassite conquest was a slow, inexorable tide rather than a sudden storm. Originating from the Zagros Mountains to the east, a rough, less civilized region often a source of tribal incursions, the Kassites were a people whose language and precise origins remain largely mysterious. They had initially appeared in Mesopotamia as mercenaries, their fighting prowess readily employed by various city-states, including Babylon during the tumultuous reigns following Hammurabi. Like water seeping through cracks, they had gradually established small, semi-autonomous enclaves within the empire's eastern marches, their numbers growing, their influence expanding. The Hittite sack of Babylon provided the opportune moment for the Kassites to transition from mere infiltrators to outright rulers. With the Amorite dynasty utterly shattered, the capital in ruins, and the military apparatus in disarray, the Kassites, led by their chieftain Gandash, or perhaps Agum II, the exact sequence and timing are debated by historians, moved decisively. They did not achieve power through a single pitched battle, but through a gradual assertion of dominance, likely filling the vacuum left by the collapse of central authority. The Kassite takeover was less a violent overthrow and more a prolonged process of political absorption and cultural acclimatization. They moved into the power centres, slowly consolidating control over the Mesopotamian heartland, initially ruling alongside remnants of the old Babylonian administration, then steadily replacing them with their own. The exact date of their ascension is shrouded in the confusion of the so-called Dark Age that followed the Hittite raid, but by approximately 1570 BC, the Kassite dynasty was firmly established on the throne of Babylon. The once mighty empire of Hammurabi had not merely fractured, it had been dismembered, then conquered. The legacy of Amorite rule had ended, supplanted by an alien yet enduring presence. Babylon, the radiant centre of a sprawling dominion, was now reduced to a vassal city, its prestigious crown worn by foreign kings. The era of internal squabbles had given way to an age of foreign subjugation, a testament to the fragile nature of even the grandest empires when their guiding will falters and new, relentless forces gather on the horizon. The vibrant, independent spirit of Hammurabi's Babylon lay dormant, awaiting a distant future when another fierce ambition might rise to reclaim its destiny. The ashes of the Hittite sack had barely cooled when the Kassites, a people whose origins lay beyond the civilizing rivers in the formidable Zagros Mountains, began their long, enigmatic dominion over Babylonia. Their rise, in the profound chaos following the collapse of Hammurabi's dynasty around 1595 BC, was less a glorious conquest and more a gradual, opportunistic assertion of power into a devastating vacuum. For nearly 5 tumultuous centuries stretching from approximately 1570 BC to 1155 BC, this foreign dynasty would sit upon the ancient throne of Babylon, not as aggressive expansionists, but as the meticulous custodians of a fallen empire maintaining a fragile peace and overseeing a period of reduced yet culturally rich existence. Initially, the Kassites were alien to the sophisticated, urbanized world of Mesopotamia. Their language, distinct and isolate, quickly faded from official use, supplanted by the venerable Akkadian spoken by their subjects. Their own deities, if they brought any, were swiftly assimilated or abandoned in favour of the rich, complex Mesopotamian pantheon, particularly the supreme patron god of Babylon, Marduk. The recovery and restoration of Marduk's cult statue, which the Hittites had so sacrilegiously removed, became a symbolic priority for the early Kassite kings, a powerful act of legitimation in the eyes of the Babylonian populace. This meticulous adoption of Babylonian identity, language, religion, and administrative structures was perhaps the Kassites' most remarkable achievement. They did not impose their own culture, they embraced, preserved, and even revitalized the civilization they had inherited. Kassite monarchs took Akkadian throne names, presented themselves as devout servants of Sumerian and Akkadian gods, and continued the legal and scribal traditions of Hammurabi, ensuring a deep cultural continuity that belied their foreign lineage. This period, often termed the Middle Babylonian era, saw Babylon transform from an imperial hegemon into a powerful regional state, its grand territorial ambitions curtailed, but its cultural heart still beating strong. The Kassite kings focused inward, on stabilizing the fertile core of Babylonia, which they termed Karduniash, rebuilding its cities and temples, and managing its vital agricultural base. They were diligent administrators, maintaining the intricate canal systems that fed the land, granting generous land endowments recorded on elaborately carved stone boundary markers known as kudurus, which served as both legal documents and religious dedications. These kudurus, adorned with divine symbols and curses, illustrate the Kassite kings' integration into traditional Babylonian legal and religious frameworks, seeking divine blessings for their land grants and emphasizing their role as preservers of order and justice. However, this peace was perpetually fragile, often a precarious balancing act between internal pressures and the ever-present threat of resurgent regional rivals. The sprawling empire forged by Hammurabi had shrunk considerably, its former territories in the Levant, Upper Mesopotamia, and the Zagros foothills now either lost or independent. Babylon's influence was largely confined to the core Mesopotamian plain, a valuable prize but no longer the undisputed centre of a vast dominion. Its armies, while effective in defence, were rarely deployed for ambitious foreign conquests. Instead, the Kassite era became a period defined by complex diplomacy, particularly evident in the famous Amarna letters of the 14th century BC. These remarkable clay tablets reveal Babylon, still a recognised great power, engaging in a sophisticated network of international relations with other prominent kingdoms of the Late Bronze Age. Kassite kings, like Bernaburius II, exchanged lavish gifts, often Babylonian horses, chariots, and lapis lazuli for Egyptian gold, and engaged in elaborate marriage alliances with the pharaohs of Egypt, the kings of the Hittites, and the rulers of Mitanni. The tone of these letters, however, often betrayed Babylon's reduced standing. Kassite kings frequently petitioned Egypt for gold, complained about meagre gifts, or gently asserted their ancient lineage in the face of perceived slights, rather than dictating terms from a position of unquestioned strength. They were equals among great kings, but often the less robust of the equals, carefully navigating a world populated by emergent superpowers. Indeed, the Kassite dynasty found itself increasingly overshadowed by these rising regional rivals. To the west, the new kingdom of Egypt, under powerful pharaohs like Amenhotep III and Akhenaten, extended its imperial reach deep into the Levant, establishing an enormous empire that dwarfed Babylonia's shrunken borders. To the north, the formidable Hittite Empire, having rebuilt its strength after Mushili's audacious raid, rose as a dominant power in Anatolia and northern Syria, constantly vying with Egypt for control of trade routes and buffer states. Earlier in the Kassite period, the Hurrian kingdom of Mitanni dominated northern Mesopotamia, a powerful military state whose influence extended south towards Babylonia, forcing the Kassite kings to maintain a wary peace. But the most ominous threats emerged from Babylon's immediate neighbours. To the east, the perennial rival, Elam, a powerful kingdom situated in modern-day southwestern Iran, maintained a constant aggressive pressure on Babylonia's eastern flank. Elamite raids and territorial disputes were a recurring feature of Kassite rule, draining resources and testing Babylonian defences. Yet, the most dangerous threat, and the one that would ultimately shatter the delicate balance of the Late Bronze Age, coalesced in the north: Assyria. For centuries, after the fall of Shamshi-Adad I, Assyria had been relatively subdued, often a vassal state of Mitanni. However, with the decline of Mitanni in the late 14th century BC, a series of ambitious Assyrian kings, beginning with Ashur-uballit I, circa 1353 to 1318 BC, aggressively reasserted Assyrian independence and began a brutal expansionist policy. Ashur-uballit I dared to correspond directly with the pharaoh of Egypt, circumventing the traditional Kassite claims to Mesopotamian hegemony and triggering outrage in Babylon. A Kassite king, Karindash, had even married an Assyrian princess, a diplomatic move intended to secure peace, but it ironically empowered the Assyrians by giving them a direct claim, however tenuous, to the Babylonian throne. This marked a turning point, as Assyria, once a distant memory, now emerged as a direct and formidable rival, aggressively challenging Kassite control over trade routes and vital territories in northern Mesopotamia. The 13th century BC saw increasing clashes between Kassite Babylonia and resurgent Assyria, punctuated by periods of brutal warfare. Assyrian kings like Tukulti-Ninurta I, circa 1243 to 1207 BC, inflicted crushing defeats on the Kassites, even temporarily conquering Babylon itself and carrying off Marduk's cult statue once more, a devastating blow to Babylonian pride and a testament to Assyrian ascendancy. Though the Kassites often managed to regain their independence, these periods of subjugation were costly, weakening their grip and further diminishing Babylon's status on the international stage. The final fatal blow to the Kassite dynasty came not from Assyria, but from the east, from their ancient foe, Elam. In a climactic series of invasions, the Elamite king Shutruk-Nahunte I, around 1158 BC, swept into Babylonia, overwhelming the weakened Kassite defences. Babylon was again sacked, its treasures plundered, and the venerated Kudurus and other precious monuments, including the Code of Hammurabi stela, were carried off to Susa as spoils of war. The cult statue of Marduk was again taken, a symbol of profound subjugation. Shutruk-Nahunte installed his own son, Kutir-Nahunte III, as governor, ending the Kassite dynasty after nearly 4 centuries of largely peaceful, if unremarkable, rule. The fragile peace had irrevocably shattered, giving way to an era of relentless foreign domination that would test Babylon's resilience like never before. The long, relatively quiescent reign of the Kassites was over, ushering in a new age of struggle and a desperate fight for survival. The fleeting triumph of Elam over the Kassite dynasty, which had ended 4 centuries of quiet rule in Babylonia, heralded not an era of liberation, but a deeper plunge into a maelstrom of conquest and devastation. The Elamite kings, particularly Shutruk-Nahunte I and Kutir-Nahunte III, had sacked Babylon, carried off its sacred cult statue of Marduk, and systematically plundered its accumulated treasures. For a brief, brutal period, Babylon was a mere provincial outpost of the Elamite Empire, its proud heritage insulted, its destiny dictated by a foreign power from the eastern mountains. Yet, the spirit of Babylonia, deeply rooted in millennia of urban civilization, refused to be extinguished. From the chaos emerged a native Babylonian dynasty, the second dynasty of Isin, often called the Isin II dynasty, which would briefly rekindle the embers of independence. Its most illustrious figure, Nebuchadnezzar I, circa 1125 to 1104 BC, became a fierce liberator. He waged a series of relentless campaigns against the Elamites, culminating in their decisive defeat and the triumphant return of Marduk's statue to its rightful place in the Asagula temple. This act of recovery was more than military victory. It was a profound spiritual restoration, reasserting Babylonian sovereignty and rekindling the pride of a long-suffering people. For a fleeting moment, Babylon breathed freely again, its ancient gods appeased, its independence seemingly secured. But this period of native resurgence, however glorious, proved to be but a brief interlude before the shadow of a far more formidable and relentless foe began to lengthen from the north: Assyria. For centuries, the Assyrians had been a significant, if often overshadowed, power in Upper Mesopotamia, their militaristic culture forged in constant conflict with mountain tribes and rival states. Now, with the decline of other regional powers during the late Bronze Age collapse, and armed with superior military organisation and a terrifyingly efficient war machine, Assyria began its inexorable ascent. From the 9th century BC onwards, the Neo-Assyrian Empire emerged as the dominant force in the ancient Near East, a colossal and brutal leviathan that would systematically crush all opposition, including its ancient, culturally rich neighbour to the south. The relationship between Babylon and Assyria became a grim, recurring cycle of conquest, brutal subjugation, desperate rebellion, and vengeful destruction. Babylon, with its immense prestige, sacred temples, and fertile lands, was an irresistible prize for the Assyrian kings, yet its deep-seated cultural identity and fierce pride made it an equally recalcitrant subject. Assyrian annals, carved in triumphant relief on palace walls, chronicled a seemingly endless series of campaigns into Babylonia. Kings like Tiglath-Pileser III, reigned 745 to 727 BC, a reformer and ruthless expansionist, transformed Assyria into a true empire. He initiated a policy of direct annexation or strict vassalage for Babylonia, often taking the hand of Bel, Marduk, to legitimize his rule, effectively becoming king of Babylon himself, or installing a loyal puppet. This forced integration into the Assyrian imperial system was met with persistent, stubborn resistance, often led by the Chaldean tribes from the southern marshes, fierce, independent clans who championed Babylon's cause against the northern invaders. Each rebellion, fueled by the hope of liberation and the veneration of Marduk, was met with overwhelming Assyrian force, often leading to massacres, deportations, and the systematic destruction of cities. The proud ziggurats and sacred precincts of Sumer and Akkad became familiar targets for Assyrian armies, their mud brick walls razed, their populations enslaved or resettled in distant lands as part of Assyrian imperial policy designed to break local identities and dilute resistance. These policies, while brutally effective in the short term, only served to harden Babylonian resolve and deepen the hatred for their oppressors. The nadir of this tortured relationship, the most visceral expression of Assyrian brutality and Babylonian resilience, came during the reign of Sennacherib, reigned 705 to 681 BC. Having endured repeated rebellions from Babylon, often instigated by the charismatic Chaldean chieftain Merodach-Baladan II, and supported by Elam, Sennacherib finally lost patience. In 689 BC, after enduring yet another protracted siege, he unleashed his full fury upon the ancient city. His annals boast of an unparalleled act of vengeance. The city and its houses, from its foundation to its battlements, I destroyed, I devastated, I burned with fire. The wall and the outer wall, temples and gods, house and port, I tore down and razed, and I threw them into the Arakta Canal. I dug canals through the midst of the city and submerged its entire area in water, making it a swamp, so that in the future no one would be able to detect the site of that city and its temples. He literally sought to erase Babylon from the face of the earth, to turn it into a watery, indistinguishable marsh, a monument to his terrifying wrath and a stark warning to any who dared defy Assyrian might. The cult statue of Marduk was again taken, carried off to Ashur, the Assyrian religious capital, further deepening the spiritual wound. But Babylon, though utterly annihilated, proved impossible to erase. Its memory, its sacred significance, and its position as the cultural heart of Mesopotamia lingered. The destruction was so profound, so sacrilegious even by the standards of the day, that it reportedly caused disquiet among the Assyrians themselves. Sennacherib's own successors seem to acknowledge the profound error of this act. His son and successor, Esarhaddon, reigned 681 to 669 BC, a ruler of pragmatic intelligence, embarked on a deliberate policy of conciliation. He understood that ruling a ghost was impossible, and that the only way to truly control Babylonia was to rebuild its venerable capital and pacify its populace. Esarhaddon initiated a massive reconstruction program, dedicating vast resources to restoring Babylon, rebuilding its temples, and most importantly retrieving the cult statue of Marduk from Ashur and returning it to the Asargala. This act of religious devotion, though calculated, resonated deeply with the Babylonians. He declared himself king of Assyria and Babylon, attempting to present a unified empire where Babylon was a valued partner, not just a subjugated province. Under Esarhaddon, Babylon once again began to rise from its ruins, its ancient streets and sacred precincts slowly being brought back to life, a testament to its indestructible spirit. Yet, even this period of reconstruction and relative peace was merely a prelude to another devastating conflict. Esarhaddon, attempting to secure a stable succession, famously divided his empire, appointing his elder son Shamash-Shumukin as king of Babylon, while his younger, more formidable son Ashurbanipal reigned 668 to 627 BC, inherited the Assyrian throne. This arrangement, intended to foster harmony, instead ignited a bitter fraternal rivalry that tore the empire apart. Shamash-Shumukin, though Assyrian by blood, quickly embraced Babylonian identity, aligning himself with the Chaldeans, Elamites, Aramaeans, and even Arabs in a grand coalition designed to break free from Ashurbanipal's suzerainty. The ensuing civil war, 652 to 648 BC, was brutal and exhaustive, a colossal struggle that drained the resources of both kingdoms. Ashurbanipal, one of Assyria's most learned and cultured kings, was also one of its most ruthless. He laid siege to Babylon for 4 agonizing years. The city, having only recently been rebuilt, once again endured the horrors of blockade, starvation, and disease. When it finally fell in 648 BC, Ashurbanipal, though not repeating his grandfather Sennacherib's total destruction, inflicted a devastating reprisal. Shamash-Shumukin reportedly perished in the flames of his burning palace. The city was plundered, many of its inhabitants slaughtered or deported, and Assyrian control was brutally reimposed. Marduk's statue remained, but Babylon was left economically crippled and politically neutered, its spirit battered, its hope of true independence a distant dream. For over a century, Babylon endured this harsh, recurring cycle of subjugation and limited autonomy. Its ziggurat, the Etemenanki, though rebuilt, stood under Assyrian watch. Its proud people, though resilient, were forced to pay tribute and accept foreign rule. But beneath the surface, the fires of resistance still smouldered, particularly among the Chaldean tribes and the venerable priesthood of Marduk. They remembered Nebuchadnezzar I. They remembered Hammurabi. They waited patiently for a crack in the Assyrian armour, for a moment when the colossal empire would finally overreach, and Babylon, the enduring city of kings, could once again rise, not merely to resist, but to reclaim its imperial destiny. The stage was set for a dramatic reversal, a violent reassertion of will against the backdrop of seemingly insurmountable odds. For over a century, the proud heart of Babylonia had beaten beneath the oppressive heel of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. The memory of Sennacherib's cataclysmic destruction, turning Babylon into a watery grave, still haunted the city's rebuilt ziggurats and palaces. Though Esarhaddon had restored the venerable city in Ashurbanipal, despite crushing a grand Babylonian revolt, had preserved its material form, the spiritual and political subjugation was absolute. Babylon was a crown jewel in the Assyrian diadem, but a jewel imprisoned, its kings often Assyrian puppets or rebellious natives destined for a swift, brutal end. The populace lived under a relentless tax burden, their sons conscripted into foreign armies, their temples often serving the whims of distant Nineveh. Yet, the flame of Babylonian identity, fueled by the ancient cult of Marduk and the enduring prestige of its millennia-old civilization, refused to be extinguished. Every destruction, every deportation, every act of Assyrian brutality only forged a deeper, more profound resentment, an almost cosmic yearning for liberation. The Chaldean tribes, fierce, independent and largely unconquered, constantly stirred the pot of rebellion in the southern marshes, providing a persistent thorn in Assyria's side and a wellspring of defiant hope for the Babylonian commoner. It was into this crucible of centuries of foreign dominance, at a moment of profound imperial weakness, that Nabopolassar emerged. His origins, shrouded in the chaos of the late 7th century BC, likely placed him as a chieftain among the Chaldeans. those resilient swamp dwellers who had never fully bowed to Assyrian might. He was not a king by ancient lineage, but a leader forged in the desperate fight for survival, possessing a rare blend of military acumen, political cunning, and an instinctive understanding of the deep-seated popular yearning for Babylonian independence. His moment arrived with the death of the formidable Ashurbanipal around 627 BC. The colossal Assyrian Empire, stretched thin across vast and disparate lands, and exhausted by decades of relentless warfare and brutal internal struggles, immediately plunged into a catastrophic succession crisis. Brothers, sons, and powerful generals vied for the throne, tearing the empire apart from within in a series of debilitating civil wars. The once feared Assyrian military, while still formidable, was fractured and preoccupied, its garrisons scattered and its attention diverted. Nabopolassar, a man of acute perception and boundless ambition, recognized this seismic shift. The Titan had finally stumbled. This was not merely a chance for another fleeting rebellion, but an unprecedented opportunity to shatter the chains of centuries and reverse the tide of history. Moving with a daring precision that belied his initial lack of official standing, Nabopolassar led his Chaldean forces, bolstered by disaffected Babylonian citizens and disgruntled elements within the Assyrian provincial administration, into the very heart of the country. The precise details of his seizure of Babylon are scarce, lost to the fragmented records of a tumultuous age, but chronicles suggest a rapid, decisive action. On the 23rd of November, 626 BC, an inscription dramatically records, Nabopolassar seized the throne of Babylon. This was not a slow siege, but likely a swift, well-coordinated coup, possibly aided by the city's populace, or by strategically placed sympathizers who opened its gates. The symbolism of this act was immense. Seizing Babylon, the ancient sacred capital of Mesopotamia, was more than a military victory. It was a powerful declaration of sovereignty, a restoration of a lost legacy. The city, which had suffered so much so repeatedly, now had a native, or at least a culturally aligned, king. Nabopolassar immediately set about consolidating his rule, not just through military might, but through shrewd political and religious maneuvering. He meticulously appeased the powerful priesthood of Marduk, the long-suffering custodians of Babylon's spiritual identity. Restoring the traditional rites, pouring resources into the dilapidated temples, and declaring himself the rightful successor to Hammurabi's glorious legacy, he quickly garnered the crucial support of the religious establishment and the populace. His authority was instantly legitimized, not by Assyrian appointment, but by Babylonian tradition and divine approval. But Nabopolassar was no fool. He knew his position was precarious. Babylon, even with its revitalized spirit and Chaldean allies, could not stand alone against the full, albeit fractured might of Assyria. The Empire of Nineveh, despite its internal strife, still possessed immense resources, experienced generals, and a reputation for unparalleled ferocity. His objective was not merely to declare independence, but to systematically dismantle the Assyrian Leviathan, ensuring Babylon's freedom would be permanent. This necessitated a meticulous long-term plan, a strategy of relentless erosion and powerful alliances. His planning commenced with immediate military reforms. He rebuilt and reorganized the Babylonian army, not simply as a defensive force, but as an aggressive offensive instrument capable of challenging Assyrian dominance beyond the borders of Babylonia. His soldiers, now fighting for their homeland and their gods rather than their oppressors, were instilled with a ferocious zeal. He fortified Babylon's defences, knowing that the Assyrians would inevitably attempt to reclaim their lost province. Walls were strengthened, garrisons established, and supply lines secured. But these defensive measures were merely a shield behind which he could prepare his sword. Nabopolassar's genius lay in his understanding of the wider geopolitical landscape. He saw the Assyrian Empire as a rotten edifice, immense but crumbling, its far-flung vassals and long-standing enemies now ripe for rebellion. His agents fanned out across the Near East, discreetly making contact with other powers who chafed under Assyrian rule or saw an opportunity in its decline. To the west, the nascent Egyptian 26th dynasty, eyeing control of the Levant, would welcome any distraction for Assyria. But it was to the northeast, in the rugged highlands of Iran, that Nabopolassar sought his most crucial ally, the Medes. The Medes, a powerful Indo-European people, had for decades been consolidating their own burgeoning kingdom, steadily growing in strength and ambition. They too harboured a deep-seated enmity for Assyria, which had frequently raided their lands and extracted tribute. Nabopolassar initiated careful, clandestine overtures to Cyaxares, the Median king. These were not casual diplomatic exchanges, but the forging of a profound, cataclysmic alliance, a pact of mutual destruction aimed squarely at the heart of the Assyrian colossus. He promised vast spoils, territorial concessions, and most importantly, the end of their common oppressor. Simultaneously, Nabopolassar waged a relentless, multi-pronged campaign against the Assyrian forces stationed in Babylonia. He systematically attacked and drove out Assyrian garrisons, city by city, securing his hold on the southern plain. The chronicles speak of fierce battles, such as his protracted struggle against an Assyrian force at Uruk, demonstrating his tenacity and growing military capability. Each victory, however minor, weakened Assyria's grip and strengthened Babylon's position, allowing Nabopolassar to amass resources, recruit more soldiers, and further solidify popular support for his newly established Neo-Babylonian dynasty. His planning was not just military, it was psychological warfare, demonstrating that the mighty Assyrians could be beaten, that liberation was not a dream but a tangible reality within reach. The stage was set, the alliances forged, and the pieces moved into position for the final audacious blow against the very empire that had sought to erase Babylon from existence. The crucible of foreign dominance had finally produced the fiery will necessary for a complete epoch-defining reversal of fortune. The year 616 BC marked a fateful turning point in the ancient world, a pivot from the seemingly immutable dominance of Assyria to the dawn of a new Babylonian hegemony. Nabopolassar, having seized Babylon and meticulously cultivated the long-simmering resentment against Assyrian rule, now unleashed his meticulously planned war of liberation. His initial campaigns were audacious thrusts into the very heartland of Assyria itself, targeting key cities like Nippur and pushing north along the Tigris. These were not easy victories. The Assyrian Empire, though weakened by civil war and internal dissent, was still a formidable military machine, capable of ferocious resistance. But Nabopolassar's forces, fueled by generations of accumulated grievance and the promise of ultimate freedom, fought with a desperate tenacity. The bitter struggle raged for years, each river crossing, each city wall a battleground for the future of Mesopotamia. The true genius of Nabopolassar, however, lay not just in his military prowess, but in his unparalleled strategic vision, particularly his ability to forge a grand, cataclysmic alliance. He understood that Babylon alone, even revitalized, could not permanently dismantle the Assyrian colossus. His overtures to Cyaxares, the ambitious king of the Medes, proved to be the masterstroke. The Medes, a powerful Indo-European people who had long chafed under Assyrian domination, and whose expanding kingdom in the Zagros Mountains was steadily growing in power, shared a deep, abiding hatred for Nineveh. The Assyrians had raided Median lands, extracted tribute, and humiliated their chieftains for decades. Cyaxares, a shrewd and ruthless leader, recognized in Nabopolassar not just an ally, but a partner in a common existential cause. The terms of their alliance, though unwritten in any surviving text, were clear: the complete and utter destruction of the Assyrian Empire and the division of its vast spoils. The combined force of the Medes and Babylonians was a juggernaut that no single power in the Near East could withstand. The Medes, with their skilled cavalry and disciplined infantry, attacked from the east and north, relentlessly pushing into the Assyrian heartland. The Babylonians, with their revitalized army and superior siege engineering, pressed from the south, systematically capturing vital strategic centers. The synchronized onslaught was devastating. In 614 BC, the Median armies, spearheaded by Cyaxares, launched a ferocious attack on Ashur, the ancient religious capital of Assyria, the very city where the cult statue of Marduk had been held captive on 2 separate occasions. The city fell in a brutal sack, its temples desecrated, its palaces burned, its populace slaughtered. Nabopolassar arrived shortly after, finding the city already a smoking ruin. The scene was one of utter devastation, a testament to Median ferocity and a stark warning to what awaited Nineveh. There, amidst the rubble and the wailing of the dying, Nabopolassar and Cyaxares formally sealed their alliance with oaths and solemn ceremonies, publicly pledging their mutual commitment to the annihilation of Assyria. The culmination of this cataclysmic alliance, the defining moment of liberation, came with the final assault on Nineveh, the glittering, seemingly impregnable capital of Assyria. For centuries, Nineveh had stood as the symbol of Assyrian might, its colossal walls, massive gates, and opulent palaces a testament to its imperial power. Its libraries contained vast collections of knowledge, its reliefs celebrated countless triumphs, and its very name struck terror into the hearts of its enemies. But now it was encircled by a vengeful tide. In 612 BC, the combined Babylonian and Median armies descended upon Nineveh. The siege was long and arduous, lasting for 3 months. The Assyrians, led by their last great king Sin-Shar-ishkun, fought with a desperate courage, knowing that for them, surrender meant annihilation. The formidable defences of Nineveh, designed to withstand any assault, were slowly but systematically undermined by the superior siegecraft of the Babylonians and the relentless pressure of the Medes. Historians suggest that a critical factor in the city's fall may have been a massive flood of the Tigris River, caused by heavy rains, which undermined the city's walls, a divine judgment perhaps, for a city that had once submerged Babylon beneath the Arak-II Canal. When the walls finally breached, the ensuing sack was a nightmare of unparalleled ferocity, an act of vengeance centuries in the making. The combined armies poured into the city, driven by a desire to utterly expunge the memory of Assyrian cruelty. Nineveh, the blood city, the oppressor of nations, was given over to the flames. Palaces were looted and then set alight, their elaborate reliefs shattered, their colossal statues toppled. Temples were desecrated, ziggurats brought down, and the vast libraries, containing millennia of knowledge, either burned or scattered. The scale of destruction was so immense that for centuries afterwards, Nineveh's very existence would be questioned, its ruins so thoroughly obliterated that its location became a matter of legend. The last Assyrian king, Sin-Shar-ishkun, reportedly perished in the inferno of his burning palace, choosing a fiery end over capture and humiliation. The fall of Nineveh was more than just the end of a city. It was the symbolic and literal shattering of the formidable Assyrian Empire. The remaining vestiges of Assyrian power, under Ashur-uballit II, regrouped at Haran and later Carchemish, attempting to rally support from Egypt. But it was a futile struggle. The heart of the empire had been ripped out. By 605 BC, following the decisive Battle of Carchemish, where Nabopolassar's son, Nebuchadnezzar, distinguished himself, the last remnants of Assyrian power were utterly destroyed. Babylon was forever liberated from its yoke. The long dark centuries of foreign dominance marked by brutal conquests, repeated destructions and constant subjugation had finally ended. Nabopolassar, the once obscure Chaldean chieftain, had not only secured his city's independence but had orchestrated the downfall of the greatest empire the world had yet seen. The cultural and spiritual wounds inflicted by Assyria were now avenged, and Babylon, risen from the ashes like a phoenix, stood poised to claim its rightful place as the new imperial master of the Near East. The era of the Neo-Babylonian Empire had dramatically begun, forged in fire and vengeance, and destined for a period of unprecedented glory under the sun of its liberator. The flames of Nineveh had barely cooled, and the last vestiges of Assyrian resistance crumbled at Carchemish when the venerable Nabopolassar, the liberator of Babylon, passed from this world. In 605 BC, his son, Nebuchadnezzar II, a general already seasoned in the crucible of battle, a leader whose strategic brilliance had been decisively proven against the Egyptians and Assyrians at Carchemish just months before, ascended the Neo-Babylonian throne. This transition was seamless, a testament to the strength of the new dynasty and the undeniable prowess of its heir. Nebuchadnezzar II inherited not just a kingdom, but a nascent empire, forged in the fires of vengeance and now poised to claim its destiny as the undisputed hegemon of the Near East. Over his 43-year reign, 605 to 562 BC, he would not merely consolidate this inheritance. He would elevate Babylon to an unparalleled zenith of power, wealth, and cultural magnificence, transforming the ancient city into the undisputed marvel of the ancient world. His initial years were dominated by a series of sweeping military campaigns designed to secure and expand the territories carved out of the defunct Assyrian Empire. The former Assyrian provinces in Syria and the Levant, now a contested prize between the ascendant Babylonians and the resurgent Egyptians, became the primary theatre of his relentless imperial ambition. Year after year, Nebuchadnezzar marched his formidable armies westward, a relentless tide that swept away any lingering opposition. He systematically subjugated the independent kingdoms of the Levant. The coastal cities of Phoenicia, with their lucrative maritime trade, were brought to heel, though Tyre, with its insular island defences, famously resisted a 13-year siege. The various Aramaean states, dotted across the Syrian plains, were incorporated into the burgeoning empire. The desert tribes, always a restless element on the fringes, were subdued, ensuring the security of trade routes. The Kingdom of Judah, with its strategic location between the great powers of Mesopotamia and Egypt, proved particularly recalcitrant. Its kings, caught between the overwhelming might of Babylon and the deceptive promises of Egyptian aid, repeatedly wavered in their allegiance. Nebuchadnezzar's response was swift and brutal, a calculated demonstration of imperial authority designed to crush all dissent. Following the rebellion of King Jehoiakim, Nebuchadnezzar besieged Jerusalem in 597 BC, capturing the city, exiling its king Jehoiakim, along with thousands of its elite, nobles, craftsmen and priests, to Babylon. This was not a temporary punishment, but a deliberate act of imperial policy, a mass deportation designed to break the rebellious spirit of the nation and integrate its most skilled population into the Babylonian economy and labour force. 10 years later, a further rebellion under King Zedekiah, again foolishly reliant on Egyptian assurances, provoked Nebuchadnezzar's full wrath. In 586 BC, Jerusalem suffered a second, far more devastating siege. Its magnificent Temple of Solomon, the spiritual heart of the Judahite nation, was utterly razed, its walls systematically dismantled, and the city itself laid waste. The majority of its remaining population was forcibly marched into exile, across the desert to the plains of Babylonia in the infamous Babylonian captivity, a traumatic event that indelibly scarred the collective memory of the Jewish people and profoundly shaped their religious identity. These mass deportations, though horrific for the affected populations, were a cornerstone of Neo-Babylonian imperial strategy, ensuring pacification, providing skilled labour for colossal building projects, and preventing future uprisings by dispersing potentially rebellious elements. With the Levant firmly under his control, Nebuchadnezzar's empire stretched from the Zagros Mountains in the east to the Mediterranean Sea in the west, and from the Persian Gulf in the south to the Taurus Mountains in the north. This vast dominion was maintained by a well-organised and highly disciplined army, a complex administrative system that ensured efficient tribute collection, and a network of loyal governors who oversaw the provinces. Unlike the brutal internal purges and constant rebellions that had plagued Assyria, Nebuchadnezzar's empire, once established, enjoyed a remarkable period of stability, a testament to his integrated approach of military might, strategic deportations, and judicious infrastructure development. The wealth flowing into Babylon from tribute, trade, and agricultural surplus was staggering, providing the resources for an unparalleled program of reconstruction and architectural splendor. It was in Babylon itself that Nebuchadnezzar's genius truly shone, transforming the ancient capital into a city of legendary magnificence, a glittering testament to his power and devotion to Marduk. He conceived of Babylon not merely as a capital, but as the cosmic center of the world, a divine city whose splendor reflected the glory of its patron god. He rebuilt, expanded, and beautified the entire city on a scale never before witnessed, famously declaring, "I have adorned the city, my Babylon, with the walls and gates as brightly as the heavens." The most iconic of his creations was the Ishtar Gate, a breathtaking, monumental entrance to the inner city. Crafted from deep blue glazed bricks that shimmered under the Mesopotamian sun, it was adorned with hundreds of relief sculptures of fearsome yet majestic animals. Golden-horned Mushushu, dragon-like creatures sacred to Marduk and Nabu, fierce lions, sacred to Ishtar, and powerful aurochs, wild bulls, sacred to Adad, marched in vibrant procession across its gleaming surface, their forms rendered in exquisite detail. This gate was not merely a defensive structure, but a dazzling statement of imperial power and divine protection, a dazzling threshold between the mundane world and the sacred heart of Babylon. Leading from the Ishtar Gate was the processional way, a wide sacred avenue paved with large flagstones of red breccia and white limestone, dedicated to the god Marduk and the goddess Ishtar. The walls flanking this pathway were adorned with over 120 relief sculptures of striding lions, each glazed in vibrant colours, symbolising the power of Ishtar, the goddess of war and love. This grand thoroughfare served as the stage for the most important religious festival of the year, the Akitu New Year Festival, during which the statues of the gods were paraded through the city, culminating in ceremonies at the Esagila. At the heart of the city stood the colossal Etemenanki, the house of the foundation of heaven and earth, a monumental ziggurat that likely inspired the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. Nebuchadnezzar devoted immense resources to completing and embellishing this towering structure, a 7-tiered temple mountain dedicated to Marduk. Though its precise dimensions are debated, it likely rose to a height of over 90 metres, its terraced levels culminating in a shrine at its apex, a symbolic staircase connecting the earthly realm to the heavens, a palpable demonstration of Babylon's cosmic centrality. Adjacent to the Etemenanki was the Esagila, the grand temple of Marduk, the supreme deity of Babylon and, by Nebuchadnezzar's decree, the undisputed king of the gods. This was the spiritual nerve centre of the empire, a complex of shrines and courtyards that Nebuchadnezzar lavished with gold, lapis lazuli, and precious timbers. He ensured its daily rites were performed with unparalleled splendour, reinforcing Marduk's preeminence and thereby legitimizing his own rule as the god's chosen vice-regent on earth. Beyond these religious edifices, Nebuchadnezzar extensively fortified the city, constructing an imposing system of double walls, Imager-Enlil and Nemet-Enlil, their immense thickness and height making Babylon virtually impregnable. He also expanded the royal palace, adding an opulent southern wing and constructing what became known as the Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Though its existence is still debated by archaeologists, ancient accounts describe a breathtaking tiered structure of lush greenery, rising in terraces from the river, watered by an ingenious system of pumps and channels. This verdant oasis, a marvel of ancient engineering and aesthetic ambition, was said to have been built to assuage the homesickness of his Median queen, Amytis, who longed for the mountainous landscapes of her homeland. Whether a reality or a poetic exaggeration, the legend itself speaks to the lavish ambition and artistic vision of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Nebuchadnezzar II's reign was an era of unparalleled brilliance. He was not merely a conqueror, but a profound patron of the arts and sciences, sponsoring advancements in astronomy, mathematics, and literature. His rule brought a period of internal peace and prosperity, allowing Babylonian culture, with its rich scribal traditions, sophisticated astronomy, and intricate artistry to flourish. The empire, forged in military might, sustained by efficient administration, and epitomized by its magnificent capital, stood as the zenith of Neo-Babylonian power, a golden age that would forever be associated with the name of its formidable king. Yet, the very ambition that built this splendor also planted the seeds of future discontent, and the immense power amassed by one man would prove difficult to maintain by those who followed. The relentless campaigns of Nebuchadnezzar II, those sweeping tides of conquest that reshaped the Near East, were not merely exercises in imperial expansion. They were often brutal, calculated demonstrations of an iron will, designed to break resistance and solidify Babylonian hegemony. Nowhere was this devastating resolve more profoundly manifested and more indelibly etched into the annals of history and the collective memory of a people than in his dealings with the Kingdom of Judah and its sacred capital, Jerusalem. This was not a minor border skirmish, but a clash of civilizations, a traumatic event that would transcend military victory to become a pivotal moment in religious history, the infamous Babylonian captivity. From Babylon's perspective, the Kingdom of Judah, strategically perched on the mountainous spine connecting Mesopotamia to Egypt, was a perpetual problem. Its small size belied its critical geopolitical position, making it a crucial buffer or, more often, a persistent thorn in the side of any hegemon. The Neo-Babylonian Empire had decisively replaced Assyria as the dominant power, and Nebuchadnezzar, having humbled the Egyptians at Carchemish, expected unquestioning fealty from all client states in the Levant. However, the kings of Judah, encouraged by a deeply entrenched prophetic tradition that often proclaimed divine protection for Jerusalem, and swayed by the siren song of Egyptian promises of military aid, consistently harboured defiant ambitions for independence. The first significant act of Nebuchadnezzar's iron will against Judah came in 597 BC. King Jehoiakim of Judah, having sworn allegiance to Babylon, foolishly rebelled, likely incited by the allure of Egyptian support. Nebuchadnezzar, still a crown prince but already leading the formidable Babylonian army, reacted with swift and overwhelming force. He marched his legions across the desert, a fearsome host of chariots and infantry, and laid siege to Jerusalem. The city, though heavily fortified, was no match for the might of the ascending empire. After a relatively short siege, Jehoiakim died, or was deposed, and his young son Jehoiakim ascended the throne, only to surrender within 3 months. Nebuchadnezzar's response was a chillingly effective demonstration of imperial power. He did not raze the city entirely, choosing instead a more insidious form of conquest: mass deportation. King Jehoiakim, his queen mother, all the royal family, the entire court, and the vast majority of Jerusalem's elite, its skilled craftsmen, artisans, engineers, scribes, priests, and leading citizens, numbering some 10,000 individuals, were forcibly uprooted from their homes. They were marched in a long, sorrowful procession, stripped of their dignity, but carrying the bitter seeds of their identity, across the vast Mesopotamian plains to Babylon. This was not merely punishment, it was a calculated act of statecraft, designed to break the back of rebellion by removing its intellectual, administrative, and economic backbone. The land of Judah was left impoverished, its leadership replaced by a puppet king, Zedekiah, Jehoiakim's uncle, who was installed by Nebuchadnezzar and forced to swear a solemn oath of loyalty to Babylon. The treasures of the temple, while not completely emptied, were partially plundered, a further humiliation. For a decade, Zedekiah ruled a depleted Judah, bound by his oath to Nebuchadnezzar. But the old tensions persisted. The remaining population, still reeling from the deportations, harboured dreams of restoration. Prophets, both true and false, debated the meaning of the exile, some urging submission, others predicting swift divine intervention. Meanwhile, Egyptian pharaohs continued their meddling, sending envoys and promises of support to the rebellious vassal states, stirring up false hope. Zedekiah, weak and indecisive, eventually succumbed to the pressure from his own court and the renewed enticements of Egypt. He broke his oath to Nebuchadnezzar and rebelled, setting in motion the final devastating act of Babylonian wrath. The news of Zedekiah's perfidy brought Nebuchadnezzar's iron will to a fever pitch. This was not merely an act of defiance, but a profound betrayal, a direct challenge to the legitimacy of his imperial authority. In 588 BC, Nebuchadnezzar personally led his full army against Judah. The campaign was methodical and ruthless. Fortified cities throughout Judah were besieged and systematically destroyed, their populations suffering immense hardship. Finally, in January 587 BC, Nebuchadnezzar laid siege to Jerusalem once more. This second siege was an agonizing, protracted ordeal, lasting for 30 months. The city's inhabitants endured unimaginable suffering. Food supplies dwindled, disease ravaged the populace, and hope slowly bled away. The prophet Jeremiah, witnessing the horror from within the walls, famously pleaded for surrender, warning of divine judgment, but his counsel was rejected. The people clung to the belief that Yahweh would protect his holy city, that the temple was inviolable. But Nebuchadnezzar's siege engineers were relentless. They built massive siege ramps, deployed battering rams, and relentlessly pounded the city's walls. In July 586 BC, after more than 2 years of starvation and desperate resistance, the Babylonian army finally breached the northern walls of Jerusalem. What followed was a cataclysm of fire and sword. The Babylonian soldiers poured into the starving city, massacring its defenders and inhabitants. King Zedekiah, attempting a desperate escape, was captured in the plains of Jericho. He was brought before Nebuchadnezzar at Riblah, where, in a horrific act of imperial justice, he was forced to watch his sons executed before his very eyes. Then, his own eyes were put out, and he was bound in bronze chains and led in ignominious captivity to Babylon, the last king of Judah condemned to spend his remaining days in darkness and humiliation. The city of Jerusalem itself suffered an annihilation so complete that it remained a desolate ruin for decades. Under the command of Nebuzaradan, Nebuchadnezzar's chief executioner, the Babylonians systematically razed every significant structure. The magnificent First Temple of Solomon, that enduring symbol of Israelite faith and national identity, was utterly destroyed, its sacred vessels plundered, its Holy of Holies desecrated. The royal palace, the city walls, and all the grand houses of Jerusalem were reduced to rubble and ash. The city was left a scorched wasteland, a chilling monument to Babylonian power. The remaining population, save for the poorest, and those deemed necessary for rudimentary agricultural labour, was then subjected to a second, larger, and even more traumatic deportation. Thousands more were marched into exile, joining their countrymen already in Babylon. This mass exile, famously known as the Babylonian captivity or exile, was a devastating blow to the Judahite nation. It represented not just political defeat, but a profound theological crisis. How could God allow his chosen people, his holy city, and his sacred temple to be so utterly destroyed by a pagan power? Yet, out of this unparalleled trauma, a new identity began to form. In exile, stripped of their land and temple, the Judahites, now increasingly called Jews, were forced to redefine their faith. Synagogues emerged as new centers of worship, the Torah became central to their religious practice, and the foundations of monotheism were deepened and solidified. The experience of the captivity, though agonizing, became a crucible that forged a more resilient and adaptable religious tradition, ensuring the survival of Judaism despite the loss of its homeland. For Nebuchadnezzar, the razing of Jerusalem and the mass deportation of its people were successful manifestations of his iron will. They eliminated a persistent pocket of rebellion, secured his western flank, and demonstrated unequivocally that defiance of Babylon would be met with total destruction. The resources and skilled labour of the exiles were put to use in his grand building projects in Babylon, further enhancing the splendour of his capital. This act, though an episode of conquest like many others in the ancient Near East, transcended its military context to become a pivotal transformative moment, forever etched into the collective memory of humanity. It served as a stark, enduring testament to the devastating power of Nebuchadnezzar's imperial ambition and the enduring resilience of the human spirit under the most extreme duress. The death of Nebuchadnezzar II in 562 BC marked a seismic shift in the fortunes of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. His colossal shadow, which had for over 4 decades cast a long, stabilizing presence over Mesopotamia and the Levant, was suddenly lifted. What followed was a dramatic and rapid succession of weak, ineffectual, and often brutally short-reigned kings, each vying for control of an imperial throne that none possessed the singular vision or iron will to truly command. The once mighty empire, built on the foundations of military prowess and administrative genius, began to unravel with startling speed, caught in a swirling vortex of internal intrigue, palace coups, and profound political instability. The magnificent walls and glittering gates of Babylon could protect the city, but they could not insulate the empire from the corrosive effects of a leadership vacuum at its very heart. Nebuchadnezzar's immediate successor was his son, Amel-Marduk, who reigned for a mere 2 years, 562 to 560 BC. His brief rule was characterized by a seemingly contradictory act: the release of Jehoiachin, the exiled king of Judah, from prison, granting him a pension and a seat at the royal table. While this act of clemency might suggest a gentler nature than his father, it was ultimately viewed as a sign of weakness by the powerful factions within the Babylonian court, particularly by those who had served under the ruthless discipline of Nebuchadnezzar. Amel-Marduk's attempts to perhaps reform or soften his father's policies likely alienated the very military and aristocratic elite who had benefited from Nebuchadnezzar's conquests and authoritarian rule. His reign was quickly brought to a violent end in a palace coup orchestrated by his brother-in-law Neriglissar. Neriglissar, a former chief minister and general under Nebuchadnezzar II, and likely the husband of Nebuchadnezzar's daughter, was a seasoned military commander with a strong claim to legitimacy through marriage into the royal family. He seized the throne in 560 BC and ruled for 4 years, 560 to 556 BC. His reign represented an attempt to restore the military focus and stability that had characterized Nebuchadnezzar's era. He led a significant campaign against Cilicia in Anatolia, aiming to secure Babylonian interests in the crucial trade routes and buffer zones of the region. He also continued Nebuchadnezzar's extensive building projects in Babylon, reinforcing the imperial image. However, despite his military experience and clear efforts to stabilize the empire, his hold on power was fragile. His legitimacy, derived from a coup, never fully solidified, and the deep-seated rivalries within the court continued to fester beneath the surface. His premature death, possibly due to illness, once again threw the empire into a succession crisis, demonstrating the precarious nature of power after the loss of the founding monarch. Following Neriglisa's death, the throne passed to his young son, Labashi-Marduk. This unfortunate prince, a mere child or possibly a deeply unpopular youth, reigned for a tragically brief 9 months in 556 BC. The Babylonian chronicles tersely record his fate. Labashi-Marduk, who was not able to sit on the throne, they put to death. This swift and brutal assassination, another testament to the cutthroat politics of the court, indicated a complete breakdown of any established succession principles and a descent into open, violent factionalism among the powerful noble houses and military commanders. The lack of a strong legitimate heir, combined with the ambitions of various aristocratic clans, created a dangerous power vacuum that threatened to tear the empire apart from within. The ultimate victor in this ruthless power struggle was Nabonidus, Nabu-Na'id, a man of obscure origins, possibly a high-ranking official or a member of the Chaldean elite, but certainly not a direct descendant of Nebuchadnezzar II. He ascended the throne in 556 BC, a compromise candidate chosen by the conspirators who had overthrown Labashi-Marduk. His accession marked a definitive break from the direct line of Nebuchadnezzar's dynasty, further undermining the traditional claims of legitimacy based on royal blood. The rapid succession of 4 kings in just 6 years profoundly destabilized the empire. Each coup, each assassination, chipped away at the cohesion of the central government, fractured the loyalty of provincial administrators, and eroded the morale of the military. The populace, accustomed to the steadfast rule of Nebuchadnezzar, watched with growing alarm as the once unshakable foundations of their empire began to crumble. This internal turmoil had immediate and catastrophic external consequences. The empire's vast territories, which had been so efficiently managed by Nebuchadnezzar, now became increasingly difficult to control. Provincial governors, no longer fearing swift reprisal from a strong central authority, became more autonomous, delaying tribute payments or outright defying commands. The crucial trade routes, so vital for Babylon's economic prosperity, became less secure as central control waned. The disciplined army, once the terror of the Near East, found its resources stretched thin, its leadership fragmented, and its loyalty potentially compromised by the constant palace intrigues in Babylon. More ominously, these periods of weakness and internal strife did not escape the notice of Babylon's neighbours. While the empire was consumed by its internal squabbles, a new formidable power was steadily rising in the eastern highlands, the Medes. Although once allies who had helped shatter Assyria, the Medes, under Cyaxares and his son Astyages, had established a vast and powerful empire that bordered Babylonia to the north and east. The Medes, in turn, were overshadowed by a new, more dynamic force emerging from their own vassal territories, the Persians. Under the charismatic leadership of Cyrus II, later known as Cyrus the Great, the Persians were consolidating their power, slowly but inexorably challenging Median supremacy. The rapid succession of weak and short-reigned kings, therefore, did not merely plunge the empire into political instability, it created a glaring vulnerability. The internal disarray, the fractured leadership, and the preoccupation with palace intrigues meant that Babylon was completely unprepared to effectively counter the momentous geopolitical shifts occurring on its eastern flank. While its kings squabbled and murdered each other for a precarious throne, the seeds of its ultimate demise were being sown by a rising power that would soon sweep away all the old empires. The grandeur and stability forged by Nebuchadnezzar II had proven to be a temporary edifice, dependent on his singular genius, and without it, the empire was left exposed, a glittering prize awaiting the next inevitable conqueror. The stage was tragically set for a foreign force to exploit this profound internal weakness, bringing Babylon's golden age to an abrupt, inglorious end. Following the tumultuous whirlwind of weak and murdered kings that succeeded Nebuchadnezzar II, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, still gleaming outwardly with the splendor of its magnificent capital, began to rot from within. Into this chaotic void, in 556 BC, ascended Nabonidus, a man whose lineage was not directly linked to the revered Nebuchadnezzar dynasty. He was likely a high-ranking Chaldean official, perhaps even related by marriage to the old royal family. But his rise was a product of the deep-seated court intrigues and power struggles that had plagued Babylon since the death of its greatest builder. His accession was a fragile compromise, a desperate attempt by the various factions of the Babylonian elite to restore some semblance of order. Yet, Nabonidus would prove to be the most controversial and ultimately catastrophic ruler of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, whose peculiar religious devotion and unprecedented self-imposed exile would fatally undermine the foundations of his reign and leave the empire utterly unprepared for the existential storm gathering on its eastern horizon. Nabonidus harboured a profound and unconventional religious zeal, one that dramatically deviated from the established theological traditions that had for centuries underpinned Babylonian power. Since the days of Hammurabi, and especially under the magnificent patronage of Nebuchadnezzar II, the supreme god of Babylon, Marduk, had been elevated to the undisputed pinnacle of the Mesopotamian pantheon. His grand temple, the Esagila, stood as the spiritual heart of the capital, and the towering ziggurat Etemenanki represented the cosmic axis of the universe. The annual Akitu, New Year festival, a meticulously choreographed ritual involving the king, the priesthood, and the cult statue of Marduk, was not merely a religious observance, but a profound act of cosmic renewal and political legitimation. It reaffirmed the king's divine mandate, guaranteed the fertility of the land, and symbolically re-established order over chaos. To challenge Marduk's preeminence was to challenge the very ideological bedrock of the Babylonian state. Nabonidus, however, became consumed by an intense personal devotion to the moon god, Sin, particularly the ancient venerable cult of Sin at Haran, a city in northern Mesopotamia. Haran, strategically located, had suffered destruction at the hands of the Medes during the fall of Assyria, and its great temple to Sin, Ehulhul, lay in ruins. Nabonidus claimed that Sin appeared to him in a dream, commanding him to restore the Ehulhul temple and elevate the moon god to a position of supreme importance. This was a radical departure from established orthodoxy. While other gods were revered, Marduk held the sun. Nabonidus poured immense resources into the restoration of Haran and the rebuilding of Sin's temple, diverting funds and labour that would otherwise have been dedicated to the continued upkeep and embellishment of Babylon's already magnificent shrines. He even attempted to establish a uniform syncretic theology, pushing for the moon god to be recognised as the king of the gods, superior even to Marduk. This blatant favouritism provoked widespread and furious discontent among the powerful, deeply conservative Marduk priesthood in Babylon. The Esagila priesthood was not merely a spiritual body, they were a vast, wealthy and politically influential institution, landowners, administrators, and custodians of the city's identity. Nabonidus's actions directly threatened their immense power, their ancestral privileges, and their theological doctrines. They viewed his elevation of Sin as sacrilege, a dangerous heresy that imperiled the cosmic order and challenged the very legitimacy of his rule. Their resentment simmered, transforming into active opposition as they subtly and later overtly undermined his authority. The scribes, often trained within temple schools, also reflected this discontent in their chronicles, portraying Nabonidus as a mad, impious ruler. Adding fuel to this fire of religious and political alienation, Nabonidus made the extraordinary decision to abandon his capital for an extended period. Around 553 BC, driven by his personal piety to Sin, perhaps a desire to escape the suffocating court intrigues of Babylon, or a strategic economic interest in the burgeoning Arabian trade routes, he journeyed westward. He established his primary residence for 10 long years, from 553 to 543 BC, in the oasis city of Taima, in northern Arabia. This was an unprecedented move for a Babylonian monarch. Taima was a vital centre for the lucrative caravan trade, connecting Mesopotamia to Egypt and the Mediterranean, and Nabonidus transformed it into a substantial Babylonian administrative and military outpost. He campaigned against local Arabian tribes, consolidating his control over the oasis network and building a new palace and temples in Taima, effectively creating a second capital far from the heart of his empire. His protracted absence from Babylon had catastrophic consequences for the already fragile stability of the empire. The very heart of the state, its symbolic and administrative centre, was left rudderless. The most devastating impact was on the revered Akitu festival. With the king, whose presence was absolutely essential for the performance of the sacred rituals, residing in far-off Timor, the Akitu festival could not be celebrated for many years. This religious void created widespread popular discontent and anxiety. To the average Babylonian, the non-celebration of Akitu meant that the cosmic order was disrupted, the gods were displeased, and the blessings of fertility and prosperity were withheld. The land itself, they believed, suffered for the king's impiety and absence. This spiritual and psychological blow further alienated the populace from their distant, enigmatic monarch. While Nabonidus busied himself in Timor, establishing Babylonian hegemony over the Arabian trade routes, his young son, Belshazzar, was left as regent in Babylon. Belshazzar, though diligent, lacked the authority and experience of his father, especially during his father's controversial absence. He faced the full brunt of the disgruntled Marduk priesthood and the increasingly restless populace, effectively holding the fort but unable to command the full loyalty or resources of the empire. His rule was constantly overshadowed by the distant, enigmatic figure of Nabonidus. The empire's administration suffered. Its military garrisons in distant provinces became less responsive, and the overall cohesion of the state weakened considerably. This widespread priestly and popular discontent, fueled by Nabonidus's religious reforms and prolonged absence, had a debilitating effect, fundamentally undermining the empire's internal unity and leaving it critically vulnerable. While Nabonidus was preoccupied with his moon god cult and Arabian ventures, a new, unstoppable force was meticulously consolidating its power in the east. Cyrus the Great, the charismatic and brilliant king of Persia, had already dramatically overthrown his Median overlords and was now forging a vast, formidable empire of his own. The Babylonian Empire, distracted by its internal religious schisms and led by an absent king who had alienated its most powerful institutions, was unprepared. Its formidable walls, built by Nebuchadnezzar, stood strong, but the loyalty of its people and the cohesion of its leadership had been fatally compromised from within, setting the stage for a dramatic yet almost inevitable downfall. The storm brewing on Babylon's eastern horizon, dismissed or ignored by Nabonidus in his desert retreat, was not merely another regional skirmish. It was the unstoppable tide of a new empire, poised to sweep away all that stood before it. Cyrus the Great, the dynamic king of Anshan, had already accomplished feats that dwarfed the ambitions of his Babylonian contemporary. He had overthrown his Median overlords, uniting the powerful Persian tribes under his banner. He had then expanded his nascent Achaemenid empire with breathtaking speed, conquering the vast and wealthy kingdom of Lydia in Anatolia and subjugating the Greek city-states of Ionia. By the 540 SBC, Cyrus stood as the undisputed master of a colossal dominion stretching from the Aegean Sea to the borders of India, a geopolitical force of unprecedented scale, its shadow now falling heavily across the Mesopotamian plain. While Cyrus meticulously consolidated his power, building a reputation as a benevolent yet formidable conqueror, the Neo-Babylonian Empire remained tragically enmeshed in the internal decay fostered by Nabonidus's reign. The controversial king's decade-long self-imposed exile in Timor had alienated the powerful Marduk priesthood, who despised his elevation of the moon god Sin and his prolonged absence from the vital Akitu New Year festival. His failure to preside over this essential ritual had, in the eyes of the populace, left the cosmic order askew, the gods displeased, and the empire itself vulnerable. Popular discontent simmered, fueled by economic hardship, religious anxiety, and the perception of a distant, indifferent monarch. Belshazzar, Nabonidus' son and regent in Babylon, though nominally in charge, faced an increasingly demoralized army and a deeply disaffected populace, unable to mend the profound rifts his father had created. The magnificent walls of Babylon, forged in Nebuchadnezzar's iron will, offered a facade of impregnability, but within them, the empire was crumbling from within, its spirit fractured, its loyalty compromised. Cyrus, a master strategist and keen observer of political weakness, was acutely aware of this internal disarray. His intelligence network, no doubt bolstered by disaffected Babylonian priests and disgruntled officials, provided him with a clear picture of Nabonidus' unpopularity. He exploited this discontent masterfully, cultivating an image as a liberator, a restorer of ancient traditions, even a chosen instrument of Marduk himself, destined to right the wrongs committed by the impious Nabonidus. This was a sophisticated form of psychological warfare, sowing seeds of doubt and promising relief from a king who had forsaken his people and their gods. The fateful campaign against Babylonia commenced in 539 BC. Cyrus led his highly disciplined and formidable Persian army southwards, bypassing many of the fortified outposts that would have once presented a challenge. The Babylonian general, probably Belshazzar himself, assembled his forces to meet the Persians in a pitched battle at Opis, a strategic city on the Tigris River. The ensuing clash was devastatingly decisive. The Babylonian army, perhaps lacking the unified command and morale of Nebuchadnezzar's era, was utterly routed. The scale of the defeat was profound, and the Babylonian forces were scattered, leaving the heartland of the empire exposed. The Babylonian Chronicle, a contemporary historical record, tersely notes, "The army of Akkad was defeated, the inhabitants of the country were slaughtered." This single battle broke the back of Babylonian military resistance. Following the victory at Opis, the Persian advance was swift and almost unimpeded. The city of Sippar, a major cultic centre and strategically vital location just north of Babylon, fell without a fight on the 10th of Tashritu, October. The Babylonian Chronicle records its surrender as remarkably easy. Nabonidus fled. On the 14th day, Sippar was taken without battle. Nabonidus was captured. This rapid capitulation, often interpreted as evidence of a prearranged betrayal or a profound lack of will to resist, opened the gates to the very capital. Nabonidus, having reportedly made a belated return to Babylonia, was caught in the whirlwind of the Persian advance, a king stripped of his power and fleeing his responsibilities. The climax arrived on the 16th of Tashritu, October 29th, 539 BC, as the unstoppable Persian army approached Babylon itself. The city, protected by its legendary double walls, the Imgur Enlil and Nemet Enlil, and nourished by the Euphrates River flowing through its heart, had long been considered impregnable. However, its defences ultimately crumbled from within. Ancient Greek accounts, particularly those of Herodotus and Xenophon, describe a clever stratagem. Cyrus's engineers diverted the Euphrates River, lowering its water level, allowing Persian troops to march into the city along the riverbed during a night of drunken revelry. While this dramatic tale adds to the legend, contemporary Babylonian sources suggest a more nuanced and less confrontational entry. The Babylonian Chronicle simply states, "On the 16th day, Ugbaru, governor of Gutium, and the army of Cyrus, without battle, entered Babylon." This bloodless conquest was a testament to the depth of Babylonian disaffection. The Marduk priesthood, deeply resentful of Nabonidus, likely welcomed Cyrus as a saviour, a divinely appointed figure who would restore Marduk to his rightful supremacy, and the Akitu festival to its proper observance. The populace, weary of instability and alienated by their absent king, offered little resistance. Belshazzar, who according to the biblical book of Daniel was holding a grand feast on the night of the city's fall, was reportedly killed, a dramatic narrative that, while perhaps embellished, captures the sense of unawareness and sudden doom that befell the ruling elite. Nabonidus himself was treated relatively mildly by Cyrus, captured but allowed to live out his days, perhaps as governor of a distant province spared the gruesome fate of many conquered kings. The entry of Cyrus into Babylon was not marked by widespread destruction or plunder. Instead, it was an act of profound political and religious astuteness. Cyrus presented himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as a legitimate successor, acting on the command of Marduk himself. The Cyrus cylinder, a famous clay artifact inscribed with a royal decree, portrays him as chosen by Marduk to restore order, return cult statues to their rightful temples across Mesopotamia, and ameliorate the conditions of the populace. Crucially, it speaks of allowing deported peoples, including the Jews exiled by Nebuchadnezzar, to return to their homelands and rebuild their temples, a policy of remarkable clemency and religious tolerance for the era. This was a stark, intentional contrast to the brutal subjugation and destructive policies of the Assyrians and the earlier Neo-Babylonian kings. With this quiet, almost understated conquest, the illustrious Babylonian Empire, after centuries of fluctuating fortunes from its humble Amorite origins to its unparalleled zenith under Nebuchadnezzar II, came to its final definitive end. Its last king had been an absentee heretic, its army shattered, and its people weary of strife. The glittering capital, the marvel of the ancient world, now became merely one of many important cities within the vast Persian Achaemenid Empire. Its independence, its unique destiny as the heart of Mesopotamia, was extinguished, absorbed into a new, universal dominion. Babylon would continue to be a significant cultural and economic centre for centuries, its scribes still recording astronomical observations, its temples still receiving offerings, but its days as an independent imperial power were over, concluded not with a climactic battle for its walls, but with a silent march through its gates, a whisper of betrayal, and the profound, quiet sigh of an ancient world passing into a new age.